to tell you a little bit about her because I think her background you'll find very fascinating in terms of this conference. So let me just share with you a little bit about who she is. So Dr. Moncrieff studied medicine at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne, and then trained in psychiatry in London and in the southeast of England in the 1990s. But during her undergraduate years, which I think is kind of interesting, she conducted research. Now, I don't know that most undergraduates necessarily conduct research, but she did, on parents' fears about substance misuse. And during the course of her psychiatry training, she worked on a trial investigating the use of the drug naltrexone in people with alcohol problems. She also investigated the prevalence of previous sexual abuse among people attending alcohol treatment services. Dr. Moncrieff also took up her current post then that she has now in 2001, and for 10 years was a consultant for a psychiatric rehabilitation inpatient unit, helping people with severe and long-lasting mental health problems. But for the last 3 years, she's been based in various community mental health services in Northeast London. Dr. Moncrieff also teaches and conducts research at University College in London. Dr. Moncrieff is one of the founding members and co-chairperson of the Critical Psychiatry Network. The Critical Psychiatry Network consists of a group of physicians from around the world who are skeptical of the idea that mental disorders are simply brain diseases and of the dominance of the pharmaceutical industry. So I think she's going to have some very interesting things to say to us. So you can see her there on the screen, and I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Moncrieff. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? Is that? Yeah, I'll assume you can. Thank you. That was a very comprehensive introduction and reminds me that my first area of interest and experience was in substance misuse. And what I suppose I've been doing subsequently is trying to take some of the principles that have been derived from our study of the use of recreational drugs and their effects on the body, and apply them to the drugs that we use to treat people with mental health problems. So, and just to say, as well as doing research, I still work in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, in London, currently in a community mental health team. So,
Dr. Moncrieff, I'm sorry, it's David. The volume's a little low on this end. I didn't know, Erica, if we had it all the way up or if Dr. Moncrieff could talk just a little bit. I wasn't sure.
Does it help if I put my volume up?
Hold on just a second.
Does that help?
Oh, we were low in the room. Did you do another test?
So is that better? Can people hear me better now?
But now.
Yes. Okay, lovely. All right, thanks. Again, just shout if there's a problem. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about understanding psychiatric drugs, the drugs we use for mental health problems, in a different way, and thinking about what that means for taking a recovery-oriented approach to helping people with mental health problems. So I'm going to share my screen now. Share my screen and show you my slides. And it's rather irritating presentation of that one, but it doesn't happen with each slide. Okay. Right. So first of all, I'm sure that all of you who work in the mental health sector will be aware that there are sharply differing views about the benefits and value of psychiatric drugs. So there are those who believe that they are miracle cures that have transformed mental health care from essentially a custodial activity to a therapeutic activity. And there are those who feel that the drugs are evil and harmful, particularly people who have taken them and been forced to take them against their will. These are some quotes from people about the experience of taking antipsychotics. People have described it as being like a drug prison or a living hell, for example. And the picture is from a protest against the use of against forced drug treatment. So what I want to say, it can be summarized really in this sentence, and I'm just showing you my books for in case you wanted to follow it up further, but there are also plenty of articles you can download for free on the internet. So my basic point is that some psychiatric drugs can be useful in some situations, but we fundamentally misunderstand what they do, and because of that, we are not using them carefully enough or sensibly enough. So the basic misconception is this: it's the idea that these drugs work by correcting an underlying biological abnormality, that they have what John Davis called in 1980 a normalizing effect. Usually that, or often that underlying abnormality has been thought to consist of a chemical imbalance, of an abnormality of one of the brain chemicals. Sometimes it's thought to consist of abnormal circuitry or networks or neurogenesis. It doesn't really matter what the abnormality is. The point is that the idea is that the drugs are rectifying something, some underlying process. And this view has been very widely disseminated by the pharmaceutical industry. Here is an advertisement for the antipsychotic zisprazidone, Geodon, showing a woman sitting in this very nice balanced position. But the same message has also been put out there by psychiatric organizations and other organizations that provide information for the public. And this idea is what I have called in a lot of my writing the disease-centered model of drug action. So it's the idea that the therapeutic effects of a drug arise from its effects on the biological mechanisms that produce symptoms. Now, note, it doesn't necessarily mean the drug is targeting the ultimate cause of the disease, just the mechanisms that produce symptoms. Most drugs in general medicine, can be understood in this way. So your inhaler for wheezing, for asthma, is something that doesn't target the cause of asthma, but it is a treatment for asthma because it reverses the constriction of the airways that produces the symptom of wheezing. It relaxes the airways. Now, there's another way of understanding what drugs might be doing when we give them to people with mental health problems, and particularly the drugs that we currently prescribe. And this is the idea that what they are doing is, rather than correcting an underlying abnormality, is creating an abnormal, or to be a bit less sort of controversial, altered state of the brain. And by altering the normal state of the brain, they produce changes to mental activity, so changes to thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And when these changes are superimposed on underlying difficulties, underlying unwanted feelings and behaviors that we might call symptoms, they may be experienced as preferable. And examples of this way of thinking might be the use of alcohol for social anxiety disorder. We know that the mental alterations produced by alcohol include the lessening of social inhibitions. And when that is superimposed on a state of social anxiety, it can be helpful. We also have a phrase in English, we talk about drowning your sorrows with alcohol. And again, that's a recognition that the altered state produced by alcohol, when it's superimposed on underlying feelings of distress and low mood, will temporarily replace those feelings. Another example that I think is helpful just to understand the distinction between these ways of thinking is to think about the effect of painkillers. So painkillers like paracetamol or aspirin are drugs that do not have prominent psychoactive effects. They don't change our mental states. They target, obviously they don't target the cause of the disorder, but they target pain mechanisms, and that's how they reduce pain. So they work in that disease-centered way. Now, opiate drugs also have some disease-centered action. They target pain conduction and slow down pain conduction messages, impulses. But opiates, unlike aspirin and paracetamol, do have psychoactive effects. They do change one's normal mental state and behavior. And one of the changes they produce is they induce a state of emotional indifference. So people who have taken opiates for pain will often say that they don't, that they still have some pain, but they don't care about it anymore. And that aspect of their effects is what I would call a drug-centered effect. So the drug-centered model highlights the fact that the drugs that we prescribe for mental health problems are what we might call psychoactive substances. That is, they are substances that enter the brain and change the normal state of the brain, and by doing so, change normal emotions and thoughts and behaviors. There are often linked physical alterations. So if we think about a sedative drug like Valium or diazepam, it produces both physical and mental sedation. And these drugs that alter people's mental states can make people feel good. They can cause euphoria. They can be pleasant to take, nice and relaxing or stimulating. But some of them are unpleasant, generally unpleasant to take. So antipsychotics, most people do not find pleasant to take. And I think this is really a fundamental misunderstanding. We've generally associated drugs that change the brain and change normal mental states with producing pleasant experiences, and therefore having and therefore becoming the target of recreational use or misuse. But that's not necessarily the case. There are plenty of drugs that produce a mental state that most people find unpleasant. And of course, there is great individual variation in the sorts of drug-induced states that people enjoy. Some people I've known people who have enjoyed the effects of haloperidol, for example, whereas most people find that a very unpleasant drug. So the drug-centered model also really emphasizes that drugs are changing the normal state of the brain and indeed of the body. And these changes, there are changes that occur immediately after the drug is taken. There are different sorts of changes that occur when a drug is taken continuously on a daily basis for a period of weeks or months. There are changes that occur when after a drug has been taken for some time and when the drug is stopped. So that's withdrawal effects. And then some drugs have what psychopharmacologist David Healy has called legacy effects. I think that's a good term. That's why I'm using it. These are persistent effects that persist after the drug has been reduced or stopped. And examples would be tardive dyskinesia that can be induced by long-term antipsychotic treatment, and also persistent withdrawal effects and persistent sexual dysfunction, which are recently being revealed to be consequences of long-term antidepressant treatment in some people. So just a little bit of history about these different ways of thinking about psychiatric drugs. Prior to the 1950s, drugs were generally understood as acting according to that drug-centered model of drug action. And this is an advertisement for amphetamine, And it's clearly highlighting its stimulant properties. It's showing how it's going to make you smart and confident and energetic. This is an advertisement for the sedative drug phenobarbital.